Good morning.
Good morning.
This is Lane DeFries on August the 1st, 2022 at 9:30 a.m. And I'm here in Denver, Colorado. And would you share where you are as you're making this recording?
Sure. I'm in Cedar Edge, Colorado. It's on the western slope of Colorado, not too far from the Utah border. So that's where we are located.
Would you state your full name?
Sure. Ray Gotfredson.
Was there another name that you were known by during your days in Worland?
No.
So if you weren't born in Worland, how old were you when your family arrived and when you left Worland?
Well, I was born in Thermopolis, but then we moved to Worland when I started the first grade. And then we left Worland and went to Tinsley. And then I did not return to Worland until I started high school.
And was it your father's work that brought you to Worland, or the schooling situation?
It was my father's work that brought us to Worland. When I was in Thermopolis in kindergarten, he drove truck for an oil company, hauling oil. But then we came to Worland and lived north of Worland, and he worked as a farmer.
And when you were living in Worland, were you in town or were you in the countryside?
We were north of town, probably about 7 miles north of Worland, on a small farm. And so then, of course, I rode the school bus into Worland from there. But after the first grade, then we moved again.
And what do you remember about the neighborhood of your farm? What are some of the pleasant things you think about as you look back on those years?
Well, the things that I remember probably the most vividly was I used to ride this one old workhorse and I fell off the silly thing and landed in a pile of logs and broke my collarbone. So that was one thing that I remember fairly plain. And then when I rode the school bus, there were a couple of girls that were neighbors, and they were older than I am. Of course, at that age, how much older were they? They were probably in maybe a freshman in high school, and they were always hugging and kissing on me, and I hated that. So I still remember that, but I got over not liking that.
Okay. Did you spend much time in town so that you have memories of the downtown Main Street and the stores?
Not at that age, I didn't. No. The things that I remember we would go where my grandmother lived in Thermopolis. We would go there and then go to the swimming pool, the Star Plunge and the Worsley, as you remember. So anyway, that was pretty much the events that I remember. Any recreational type things. Yeah. Not in Worland, as a little kid, there was nothing there for me.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned before we started the recording that you lived in the Tinsley area too. So Tinsley being at the foot of the Bighorn Mountains, I'm sure that became part of your memories too, the Bighorn Mountains and the ranch country around Tinsley.
Absolutely.
Is there anything you'd like to add about that? Well,
prior to me starting the school, my folks had a sawmill on the Bighorn Mountains near Onion Gulch. I don't know if that would mean anything, but anyway, they had a sawmill. And so we were up there at that time, running around the mountain, and I would be hunting arrowheads because the Tolmans had a sheep area where they would bring the sheep in, and they would work those sheep, and it would stir up the rocks in the soil, and then I could go out there and find arrowheads until I couldn't find any more. If they brought the sheep back in, their hooves would churn up the soil enough I could find a few more arrowheads, and so that was a big thing. And one of our neighbors was Bounce Helmer. He was a sheep herder and had his wagon up on top of this hill, and got very acquainted with him. But he was involved in the 10 Sleep raid. If you remember the sheep and cattle war, he was involved in that. He was just like an 8-year-old boy, but he remembers that.
And for those in Worland that might be listening that aren't familiar with it, would you like to explain just a little bit what it was?
Well, it was a feud between the cattlemen and the sheep, and the cattlemen didn't want the sheep people on their ground grazing in the grass, and so there was a real hate for them, and it got down to where they got into fights and actually killed people over it. And so that's what the 10 Sleep raid was all about. It was a battle between the cattlemen and the sheep.
And those feelings lasted for several generations, didn't they?
Oh yeah. I think there's probably still a little bit of a dispute between them. But if you go up the Norwood, you'll see a big sign up there about the Spring Creek raid. I mean, it's right alongside the highway that they have put up since years and years later. But so anyway, that's kind of the interesting parts for us. And of course, as little kids, I still remember fishing in Onion Gulch. It's just a very small little stream, and you just cut a cut a willow stick and put a string on it and dig up a worm, and that's how you fished. And
You caught fish, trout?
Oh yeah. A big one was probably 9 inches long, so they were pretty small, but it didn't matter. I mean, you just had to catch more of them, so Mom had a little more to cook. So, and we had loggers there that worked the sawmill, and I do remember one guy. He had a bad tooth, and it was bothering him enough that he had one of those. Remember the mirrors that were magnify on one side, the other side was normal, and he had one of those and a dish pan full of water and a straight razor and a pair of pliers, and he sat there and cut that tooth out of his head and got it out of there. And as a little kid, I remember the blood running into that dish pan and he was cutting that tooth out. He got it out.
Oh my
So, those are little things that stick in your mind.
I understand.
Yeah. Well, there was no way to get to town. I mean, it's too far away.
Well, many of us had fathers who served in World War II. And so what do you remember about those years prior to first grade? Like could be 1941 to 1948. And sometimes our father's sense of duty and their lengthy years away impacted our lives. Many people had to move, but others stayed right there in Worland. So what do you remember about your experiences?
Well, I don't remember when Dad got home from the Second World War, but he had been injured pretty badly. And so I do remember him vaguely when I was at that age, and he was started driving truck hauling oil, and and you know he he probably suffered possibly from PTSD. Uh, I do remember him being in Worland Ortham office, and you'd see some guy that was really scary to me as a kid, and I'd say, "What's wrong with that man?" And Dad would say, "He's shell shocked." And my dad would go over and put his arms around the guy, and to me, he was a scary guy, so he'd stay away from him. But my dad would always go over and talk with him, and so I remember that about that.
Of course you do. Yeah. In first grade, our elementary years were approximately 1948 to 1954. So where did you go to school?
I went to school in Worland in the first grade, and my memory is shot right now, but what was the school just north of the Emmett School? Was that the Evans? Was that the
The
Evans?
Watson.
Watson, that was it. Okay, I went to school, the Watson School, but we had to walk over to the Emmett School for music. And you probably did something similar, but, and so the first grade, that's where I went to school. And then from there, we moved to Tinsley, and I was there until high school.
And you had some unique experiences in the Tinsley schools. Would
Yeah,
you like to share that?
yeah, we lived on a Redland place. My dad worked for Richard Redland. And so my older brother and I went to the Red Bank School, which was a very small little school. And we would either walk or ride our horses. There was a little lean-to type shed there, and Dad would all bring in hay and stuff and stack in there. And then Jim and I could give our horses some hay when we would ride in. And, but my brother and I were the only two in school, or oh no, when it was started second grade. But then another family moved in with two girls, and so then there were four of us. And another family up the road a ways moved in a couple of years later, and then the school wouldn't hold anymore. And so my dad hauled us from there down to the Big Trail School, hauled us down in the back of a 49 Ford pickup. And he only did that 1 year. And then another rancher up there, Dexter Bush, he started driving, and he had a station wagon, so it was better traveling. But anyway, we ended up with, for a while, there was four of us, Kay, Indiana, Tolman, and Jim and I, my older brother. And we did have to come to school, and we were required to start the fire in the wintertime. Start the fire in that old potbelly stove and get it warm before the teacher came over. And we also had to bring something for her to eat. And so we would bring a can of soup or something like that and set it on the stove and eat it. And so it was interesting. But, you know, she lived in a little 18-foot trailer house with no amenities,
Hello.
electricity, no water, no nothing. So if the lady needed to go to take a bath,
Hello.
she had to walk. She had to walk to the neighbors in order to take a bath. So,
That's very different from our teachers today.
oh, well, just to give you an idea, we had 5 teachers 1 year.
Oh. So you had a unique experience, definitely.
Yeah, that was fun.
Building fires and the teachers that, roughed it too. But
Yeah, it was pretty tough on the teachers, but that's why they didn't last very long. And I don't know that we always got the cream of the crop, but I can say I had one teacher, Mrs. Erzinger, And she obviously was an English major because that's pretty much all she taught. When it come to math, I was really struggled the later years in school. But because of the English and how she concentrated on English, when I started college, I went to Casper College. I tested out of my English classes without taking them. And then I transferred to Colorado State University and I tested out of those and never took an English class in college. And I have to say thanks to her.
The one-room schoolhouses had benefits too.
Oh, absolutely. Because, you know, my older brother and the gal in his class, you know, you can't help but listen to the lessons that they were being given. So you got your lesson plus theirs. So it's beneficial.
Yeah.
There's some pluses.
Were you in Worland for or junior high school? We called it then, not
Yeah.
middle school.
No, I didn't go back to Worland until I was a freshman.
Okay, where were you for middle school years?
Still in Ten Sleep, but we had to go down to the Big Trail school because we had too many kids. And so that's when then they bused us from where we lived down to the Big Trails because it was a larger country school. But and you know, maybe better facilities because of the fact the teachers we had a teacher that would stay there all year. And I don't know if you remember Zelda Black. She was our county nurse. She used to come up and give us the tick shots. and Pop Emmett, he used to come up with these big old pocket watch and give us a hearing test. And so
Approximately how many students would there be in a class? Or did they have combined classes or?
no, we were all in that one room schoolhouse. And I would say we had probably at the highest, probably around 7 or 8 of us would have been. So that pretty well filled it up. And that school is over in Ten Sleep in the museum. That Red Bank, or the Big Trail School, the big country school. It is in the Ten Sleep Museum.
Did they move the building
Yes.
into town?
Yes, yeah. In Ten Sleep, if you go where the museum is, you'll see that schoolhouse sits there. So when I go to Ten Sleep, not very often I get up that way, but I always like to go in and say, well, this is the desk that I sat in, and so and so sat here. You know. Yeah.
Was it large enough that you had school activities, clubs, or organizations?
No,
Mhm.
not at all.
Yeah.
Sure.
And the kids who attended, I'm sure everybody had chores to do when they got home.
Sure. I mean, that's just that kind of life. Sure.
Yeah.
And pretty much everybody, you know, all being kids growing up in that under, you know, in an ag area, you probably had a cow to milk if you were old enough, and you know, had to feed the horses or feed, you know, always had something, and or milk the cow. That was the big one.
And then your family moved into Worland so you could go to high school.
Yeah, Mom was already there because she had bought a little house on North 9th years before and had rented it out when we were in Ten Sleep. So she already lived in Worland, and I lived with my granddad on a ranch in Ten Sleep, and so that's what kept me up there. I didn't move with my folks. I stayed there and worked for Bill Clark. He bought the place, he and his wife, and so when they they were having some problems. He was an oil man, but he bought this ranch and really didn't know what he was doing. And so they were having some problems with their cattle dying. And Dad said, why don't you ride down there and see what's going on? So I rode down and I could see what had happened. And anyway, then my granddad went to work for him. He was just an old cowboy. And he went to work for him, and I stayed with my granddad on that ranch. And I stayed there until, like I said, until I was in high school. I had to move because we didn't have any.
Right. So did you enter Worland High School as a freshman?
Yeah, as a freshman, I came into Worland, and Worland was a great place, and I had great teachers there, and Worland was a good school.
And you made the adjustment from the small schools to a larger high school.
Yeah, you adjust, but most of my classes, of course, my interest was in agriculture because that's where I'd kind of grown up.
That was your background.
Yeah, and so BOAG was my big thing, and Ray Lowe was the BOAG teacher, and I learned a lot of life skills from him, and taking his classes in BOAG. So he was actually had a lot to do with me choosing my major in college. Because I went to him and told him that I was wanting to go to school because I was going to go on the GI Bill. And I said, maybe I should become a BOAG teacher. And he said, I don't think so. He said, your wife teaches school and she's on a 9-month contract. He said, if you're a BOAG teacher, you're on an 11-month contract. He said, why don't you go into industrial arts? And he said, then you would both have a 9-month contract. So that's what I did. Mm-hmm. So then when I got out of college, I taught for a few years and then I went into construction. But Ray Lowe was a major factor in my life.
Yeah. I'm sure there are many in Worland that could say the same thing about him.
Yeah, I think most everybody that knew the man. Yeah.
So when you were in high school, did you have time to participate in any clubs or organizations? Or what was your life like once you got to Worland?
Well, what FFA was my big thing, and being on the judging team and traveling around the state to different judging, for judging livestock, and actually learning about how you keep books and to make it profitable to raise a sheep or pigs or and how to judge good ones from bad ones, and poultry the same way. And so that was my biggest thing was BOAG and the activities there.
And the animals that you were judging, were they from farms or ranches, or were they animals that the youth had raised? Or?
No, they were from other ranchers or farmers throughout the state. If you went to Powell or something, there'd be pens full of sheep and steers, and so that's what you did. You judged them, and then you gave oral reasons why you placed this one above that one. So that part was better than a speech class.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, you stood up there individually and in front of the judge and gave your oral reasons and tried to convince him that how you judged them was the best way they should be placed. So.
Is there anything else you want to add about your high school memories?
Oh, at nights, as kids, we always had the drag main, of course, and of course, Worland had really wide streets. And Main Street was really wide. And so we used to race backwards. Which, you know, not too many people there at night anyway. So yeah, but that type of thing, that was important, and it was things you will always remember.
And the people you did
Oh,
them with.
Oh yeah, sure, yeah, yeah. Larry Swing and Lorne Laird, those were some of the, you know, I mean, there were others, but those were two that popped into your head right away.
Well, most of us in our class of 1960 have turned 80. And because of the COVID pandemic, we had to postpone 2 of our 60th reunions. And finally, we got together in person in May. So we've talked about our time together, and we've had emails and Zoom and telephone calls. And our phone calls have been without operators, like when we were kids. And this is our chance to look back and consider, what about the experience growing up in Worland and Tensleep created the most impact on your life? And you've explained some of that, the influence of the agriculture and Ray Lowe, and your choice of the college major. And have you been doing anything in your livelihood that you dreamed about as a young person when you were in school?
No, I'm glad I grew up under the conditions that I did, because it makes you appreciate now what you have. You don't take anything for granted. I think it's in some ways made me a better person to grow up under those conditions. But just reflecting back, we didn't know this at the time, but you know, we had the internment camp up in Park Mountain. We didn't know about that. So it was interesting at our reunion to have that brought up, and how us kids didn't know about that, and our folks didn't tell us about that. So that was interesting to grow up in the Worland area and know that now, knowing that happened there, and yet our folks did not tell us about it. And why, I don't know. Maybe it was an embarrassment. I don't know.
Is there anything else that comes to mind that you'd like to share? Something we haven't talked about yet?
I can't think of things right now.
And Kathy, you may have a few follow-up questions.
I wonder if you could explain what it means to drag main. We all know, but in 2050, they're not going to have a clue.
Oh, you don't think? I don't know. I mean, you just got in your cars and you drove up and down Main Street throughout the whole evening, you know, and you would meet other people out there in their cars, and the next thing you know, you probably had a little drag race going on.
What's a drag race, and where would you drag race?
Right on Main Street. We'd start at one end and see who could get to the other end the fastest between the two cars, and then we would try it backwards.
Backwards?
Sure.
What time of the night would you do backwards? I don't remember backwards.
9, 10, 11 o'clock. Yeah.
So where did it start and where did it end? what parts of Main Street
Well,
would we drag Main on?
well, basically from down by the railroad tracks, we always made a U-turn right there. And then the other end of it, which would be, I don't remember now, there used to be a little, used to be a little place there where you could get a hamburger or a malt or something. Do you remember the name of that?
Wilson's Drive-In?
That might have been it. That might have been right at the very end. You know,
So
before-
right before the bridge over the canal.
Yes, yeah, right
So
there.
it wouldn't even have gone to 15th Street.
No, no, right. I think now there's a car wash there, as I recall. And I think that's where that little building used to sit.
When do you suppose they tried to stop? They probably did stop dragging Main because you can't turn a U by the railroad tracks anymore.
Well, I don't know why not. Nobody else is around. You just do
Well,
it.
I don't know. When we at our reunion, when we had our
Yeah.
little drag down, nobody knew what to do when we couldn't do the U-turn.
Yeah,
And so that was
but
kind
you
of
know
the
that-
end of it.
Yeah, but we were doing it at night, so it didn't matter. And you only had one cop and you knew where he was. So, yeah.
You were in high school. Did you have after-school jobs or any
Yeah.
kind of job besides going to school?
Yes, I drove school bus my junior and senior year. The first year, my bus route ran out by Winchester. And then my senior year, my bus route went up to Gooseberry. Those were the two longest routes that we had. And so anyway, yeah, that was an after-school thing that and it was the farm kids that drove the school buses. And it was mainly probably because they started driving, farm trucks when they were real young. And so then by the time they got there, they were fairly experienced in driving and larger vehicles. So, and right offhand, I do not recall anybody driving that wasn't a farm kid with a farm background. And I believe that's probably why. We did have to take a test to drive. The patrolman took us out and we had to drive the school bus, and he would tell us what to do or where, and so that's how, and if you failed that, of course you wouldn't have gotten the job. And I believe that paid $65 a month.
That was good money for that
It
job.
was, yeah.
And who was in charge of that program? Was it a teacher or was it a school administrator? Do you remember, and how you were chosen for it?
No, we had a what we call the bus boss, and he was actually the mechanic, but he also, disciplined you if he felt like you were doing something wrong, or, but yeah, but of course it would have been through the school and the school boards and that type of thing to approve that. And I'm sure it probably even got into the state level, because at one time they were trying to stop that. But we had such a good driving record that they really could not, do away with the program for kids driving, because we did have a wonderful record. And, so it was a good program, and like I say, it was $65 a month. That was good money.
And Gooseberry is quite a distance
Oh yeah, it is. Yeah,
from
it is.
Worland. So
Sure.
like, do you remember how long it would take you to make that route?
No,
Back?
I don't recall now how long it was, how long it took, but I would guess it would probably have taken a couple of hours go one way, because you're having to make quite a few stops, and you we drove down into the people's houses, into the farmyards. But we didn't drop them off at the lane. We took them right to their doorstep. So, you know, it did take quite a while. But, you know, not thinking about that, I can't really come up with a time.
But I'm sure in the wintertime, it would be dark by the time you got back.
Yeah, pretty close.
Mhm.
It was, yeah, but that was pretty long route. And the first one out to Winchester, that's quite a way. And our speed limits when we were loaded was 35 miles an hour. That was our max. And when you were empty coming back to the bus barn was 45. Those were the, yeah, quite an experience.
Well, that was a lot of responsibility for a young person to handle.
Yeah, but you know, the kids stepped up the plate and they did well.
Thank you.
You bet.
Ray, I have a question about that. So what time would you have to get up in the morning to go get the school bus and to start driving it?
Oh, probably around 6, I'm gonna guess. You would get there, you know, Carl Dirks was a bus boss and so he was always there, you know, to open the door. And of course you parked your buses so as you weren't in the middle of the row, you know, I mean, you had to park so you were next to the door. So anyway, when you get there, your bus was ready to go. And we cleaned them ourselves. He did all the maintenance on them, but we were required to sweep them out. Every time you got back to the barn, you had to sweep your bus out and keep it clean inside. But yeah, I'd say probably around 6 o'clock.
Would you walk over or did you have a car by then or a pickup or something?
You know, I walked because it wasn't that far. I did have a car by then because, like I was saying, it paid $65 a month for driving the bus, and my car payment was $60, so I had $5 left over. Fill the gas tank, but you know, what was it, 20-25 cents a gallon? It wasn't so bad.
What about the other farm kids? Because that'd be kind of a distance for them to drive in, or I guess they would drive. Somehow they'd get there to get their bus.
Sure. Yeah, they drove in. They drove in their cars and parked them there and jumped in the bus. And yeah.
Where was the school bus garage? Where was it located?
Over by the elementary school, where the Pepsi plant is now. Close.
Okay, Watson and Emmett buildings.
Yeah, right there. Yeah, pretty close to the Watson building. There was that big parking area and part of the playground, but it was. But that's where we would park our cars if you were to park the car there. But that's where the bus barn was. Yeah.
How did you control the kids?
Oh, you know, for the biggest part, kids get along with other kids pretty well. And so I don't remember ever having a discipline problem at all. I don't remember any of the other drivers ever having a discipline problem. Every once in a while you'd have to holler at them and tell them to sit down, you know, because they couldn't be walking around. But, you know, you get them house broke, they're all right.
Any more questions, Catherine?
No?
Well, it's been fun.
It's been great fun.
Ray, thank you so much for sharing not only your experiences, but your reflection on looking back and the wisdom that you've imparted to the listeners. And we thank you so much. And thank you, Kathy.
You thanks, girls. Been my pleasure.